We can start now with the first question. If anyone would like to open up the question session, please.
Judith Beard, Environment Agency. It's a question for Andy. Really fascinating project, and I was amazed at actually the amount of data and data sets that you seem to have and were available to you. Were there any areas of data that you felt you could have done with, and were you very confident in the quality of the data that you had for those data sets?
So there's an awful lot of data out there, and actually a lot of it sits under yourselves at the EA and DEFRA, and it's for organisations such as ours, it's massively important, really good. So we really appreciate that. Sometimes, I mean, I'm not a data expert for our organisation, but sometimes there is an issue on the detail, so the scaling. So with Taunton, it was quite good. So when you're looking at things like green spaces and stuffs in the town, there is actually quite a lot of data. We also use similar data out in the countryside for our upstream thinking and similar rural, and sometimes the data sets of those could be a little bit better. So it would be great if the EA could put funding back towards, because you were doing some fantastic data collection, and I'd like to see that start again, so that'd be good.
Ken Pratt, WSP, Lincolnshire County Council. I take it that there's still the concern where you use all these methods under extreme events, because all the way through it, it's been high-level overflows to existing systems when the system isn't working and all the rest of it. In Lincolnshire, it's the number of times you've got high water courses for a week at a time or something, and then the storm hits the catchment. Do any of you have any experience or any thoughts on how these systems can operate in that sort of scenario, and would they be any better than the sort of traditional systems? And the sort of second question is on maintenance. How easy is it to get people to maintain these in the future? Because there's been so many lovely ideas come over the years, and well, even if you go outside, I'm sure you'll see gullies that are full of silt.
Certainly when we've built the SuDS involving water butts in the system, it's felt as though what would be a really useful way to manage the system would be to draw down the water butts at the time when you've used whatever water you need for the summer, before the winter rains come, drain it down so you've got a bit of capacity in there. And I think that would be a good principle to follow at a larger scale as well, because I totally get the point that you're making, that if everything is saturated when you then get your downfall, you've got no capacity to absorb anymore. So building in something that enables that to happen, whether that's somebody opening the taps or something a bit more technical, I think is a valuable way to look at it, definitely.
I was just going to say, we've got a large rain garden. The large rain garden that we have out front of the council offices has a controlled flow. So so essentially, every time there's a rainfall, if it reaches, it has an overflow, and if it reaches that overflow, it then goes through a control mechanism that allows it to release back into the drain system. So if you have a huge rainstorm, it will drain away. It won't just sit there and wait for infiltration to happen. It will be released back into the main sewer system at a controlled rate so that it's ready to receive more. And from that, we perhaps don't get the same rain that you maybe experience in Lincolnshire, but it never has more than we've had to make it slightly deeper than what we initially planned, just because of the tree roots and where they ended up. And so rather than being a wider area and shallower, it is quite deep, but it never really gets more than a couple of inches. And so, to even reach that overflow. And I know there has been, there's some really good examples in Hammersmith and Fulham, for example, where they doused a system with a tanker full of water and things like that. And they show how actually, if you're designing a combination of infiltration, and you can have geocellular storage underneath your rain gardens, so that can, allow for storage, and then, infiltration from those, and then control. So it's a combined, you can combine all these sorts of mechanisms to allow it to be ready for the next flow. And I think from what I've seen, most of these systems have been functioning quite well, not always, and so there is a certain amount of trial and error. And as far as maintenance goes, and that's what I was talking about in mind, it's really important to get the whole school community behind it, and we set up maintenance agreements with the school at the start of the project. And schools should be maintaining their drains already. The amount of schools that we've gone into and their drains are already silted up, and really that should be part of the regular maintenance process. And adding SuDS to the site doesn't necessarily add to the workload, it just changes the sorts of routines. And so as long as you make sure that you're clear about what's going to be required at the start, then really you're not adding to any of the maintenance. You provide a detailed outline plan, so they know specifically what they need to be doing and when. And that's how we've operated in terms of installing our SuDS in schools. And it's the same with, any sort of, they should be, drains do get silted up, they need flushing regularly, and so will SuDS, and it shouldn't add to your workload. So that's how we've dealt with it.
Let's not kid ourselves. These are demonstration projects, but we've been looking at here. You're not going to take the pressure off the urban landscape with a few demonstration projects. What you actually need is comprehensive use of these things throughout the system. Understanding where your poorly performing CSOs are, for example, working upstream of those. So, I spoke about Kilkenny Court because we knew we had an issue downstream, but that's one little project. You need to take it on a much wider basis, and that's going to require a lot more input from the planning, and the way we build things, and the way we the way we deal with it in the urban landscape, and not forgetting that obviously a lot of this flooding starts upstream, so you've got to take a whole catchment approach. So it's it's a whole system we've got to think about. This is just some ideas of what you should be doing, what we could be doing.
And when it comes to the issue of are the school drains being maintained, I think part of the problem with drains that we've come across working with communities and giving lots of talks and having lots of discussions with people is that drains go underground, and consequently people don't think about them anymore. People forget about them. By creating an above ground or an obvious system that is there to tackle the issue, just raises that in everybody's awareness. So I think the more we can do that, the better, really.
Hi, Ruby Shepperson from Suffolk County Council. I just have a question following on from the latter one then about maintenance, perhaps for Charlene, about have you ever faced with any schools when you've spoken about SuDS, have you had any liability issues or they're not wanting to perhaps adopt something because of health and safety, that kind of thing? Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because there is no standard, it's not standardized across all of the schools in terms of what they will accept as health risks and things like that. So, for example, and there were concerns about standing water, for example, and whether it had to be fenced off and all of that sort of thing. And it's interesting because we were putting in a swale, for example, at an area where they were experiencing puddling. And actually, the standing water that was going to be in the swale was quite often less than what would have been in the puddle. And so a lot of it is about perception of risk. And there's not just those sorts of ideas as well, but there's also health and safety in terms of if children are playing on it and things like that. You have to be thinking that it's going to be safe from that point of view as well. And it's really about working with the schools and just making them aware of what the risks actually are. So, they did raise that. We're talking about the standing water. And as soon as you talk about, well, actually it's going to be less than what your puddle is, then they were like, oh, okay, then that makes sense. And how it can disperse the water, because that was the idea, is it was puddling in one area and ending up quite deep, whereas this was going to disperse the water around a swale. And at one stage of the design had double fences on either side of the swale, and we managed to convince them to get rid of that. So yeah, it just takes a lot of communication, and that's why getting the input from the school and working with them, because they really did like the idea of it, because in the centre of that was a playground that looks like a play equipment that looked like a boat, so it seemed ideal to have sort of swale, but I think they got the wrong idea. People often do about swales that it's going to be a river. And so just making sure that, and I think what we could have done better as well is if you have illustrative ways of communicating it as well. So landscape architects that provide those sorts of drawings are really useful, because rather than just, initially we were primarily working with engineered drawings and, really technical drawings, and they meant nothing to the schools, and then the words didn't help visualize it. So I would say those sorts of mood boards and those sorts of things are really useful. Yeah.
Thank you.
The only thing I'd say on top, looking at the risk assessments, so there's some really good stuff on sustrains and Syria on risk assessment templates. So it's having that veracity when we do the risk assessment, so you've actually got the evidence there to actually engage with the people, because you need that a bit of paper, and you need to make sure that you've done your proper health and safety risk assessments to close the arguments down, because you will end up with some really stupid arguments otherwise from people. Not every people.
Yeah, we had a lot of work to do on, not to do with the SuDS project, but you saw the floating habitat project that we've done in Northwich, and the actual installation just took a day, preparing the paperwork and the plans and the designs and everything for it, and satisfying both Canal and River Trust as the landowners and Environment Agency in terms of flood risk. Just took so much of my time. So convincing people that you've got it covered is quite a big task, really. Yeah.
One thing I would say on that, you were asking whether there was anything that didn't go ahead. I find that schools are very apprehensive about ponds and wetlands. It's such a shame, but that was one thing that we didn't really. I mean, none of our designs needed them in the end. It wouldn't have worked out, but there was a lot of scepticism about having those in the playground.
Hi, Simon Curl from Suffolk Lead Local Flood Authority. It's similar to Ruby's question, really, but it's about perception of danger of water. It's crazy in some respects. I mean, it's just not there, really, and children would be best actually shown some water and work and play with it rather than be afraid of it. And yet, I guess the head teacher is the one who has the final say and stuff. So has it been easy to convince head teachers that this is not dangerous, or this is good, this is learning?
What I would say, I often refer to Play England's document. So there's a really great document from Play England that's about risk and play. And there is a movement towards that at the moment, towards risk and play. The recognition that I think we have, wrapped our children in cotton wool a little bit too much, and that, by the time they get to be teenagers, they don't know how to deal with risk because they've never dealt with it before. So, there's a great document, so I refer to that quite often. I mean, and just being, confident in your own designs as well, that there isn't going to be any substantial risks. In terms of, I think there are some great examples out there to use as well. I used the example near where I live because there is one of those. I know there's one at the Olympic Park as well. There's a lot of those playgrounds now that have lots of boulders and natural play and sluices and pumps and things like that. And you can go and they're incredibly popular, and and not dangerous. I've not heard of any incidents on them. So case studies and documents, evidence like that, going back to being evidence-based, I think it generally can dissuade fear.
Okay, we have two further back, or three now, Paul.
Shall I just go away?
Is that working? Ron Ledbury, Chairman of Blackthorns Community Association, retired civil engineer. When hopefully SuDS approval bodies eventually come into existence in England, a greater sort of emphasis will be placed on future operation and maintenance and costing of SuDS schemes. Do any of the participants think that taking into account realistic costs for the possibly the next 30, 40, 50 years for management of their schemes, would they still be viable? They're all very laudable in terms of, first being constructed, but enthusiasm quickly runs out, and you have to cost these things for the long term to make sure that they're successful. Otherwise, if you look at it in the cold light of day, the capital investment may be sometimes wasted and better spent on building or constructing hard pipe systems.
So each of the schemes that we've done with schools and the communities, they've been handed over to the relevant authority. So Taunton Dean took ownership of the rain gardens and the planters one. The maintenance associated with those is no more, if probably less than what you'd have had there anyway. So regarding the drains, etc. So when the guys come and cut the grass, for example, the same people are going to actually just clear the litter in the river that goes over the path. So they've already got that all locked in. And a well-designed blue-green infrastructure, SuDS, is not more intensively to maintain than existing. So there should not be an issue. It's just changing the way we do things, and handing it over properly.
Yeah, the only concern that I've really got about the projects that we've been involved with is whether the plants are going to be maintained, really. If the plants are not maintained, the SuDS will still do its job effectively. And because they're right there, they're right in entrances to buildings, or it's where there's gardens happening, hopefully the plants will get maintained. But if they don't, the system should still work as a SuDS project.
Okay, we have at least two more. Paul at the back.
Hi, I'm Paul Backus from Jacobs. I just had a quick question, probably a complicated question. It's really, what are the thresholds of third sector involvement? At what point do you finally say this task, this job might be a bit too much for us? Do you ever feel like you have to take a step back and get involvement from a different party or organisation? Yeah, it's kind of as simple as that, but it's not an easy question to answer. I appreciate.
So that some SuDS schemes are really simple. So if you're going to put a rain garden in your own garden, one would hope that you could use the rain garden on the Syria stuff to actually design something quite good. But actually, obviously, when the rain garden that we put together actually had technical input. We didn't actually sit down at Westcountry Rivers Trust and design ourselves. What we actually need is more of the Jacobs-esque type organisations having the expertise and the willing to push this stuff more. So when you're designing a 500 housing estate, actually blue-green SuDS is a major part of what you're putting in, and getting the people, or the building companies, the persons of this world, actually engaging properly, and that's hopefully something that you guys can help with as well.
Yeah, the community engagement and the volunteers' involvement is really all about raising awareness and building a case for these things to happen at a bigger scale. And it's not for volunteers to be taking actions which make a difference on a catchment level. It's that's for other decision makers, but it just adds so much more benefit when you can involve the community. And I would be looking to work with suppliers, contractors that can actually do that. Now, we were very lucky with our involvement with Biomatrix Water. They did a fantastic job of gearing the session of installing the floating habitats to working either with school children or with volunteers with all different needs. And the more that we can find contractors, suppliers that can do that, the greater the benefits are going to be.
I would just say as well that we're quite keen as a Rivers Trust to develop simple solutions that, like almost kits that we can then offer to schools and things like that. But we do lack confidence, and so it would be really useful to be able to tap into some engineers and stuff who we've worked with, we have worked with some engineers before, but, rather than, what's happened in the past is the engineers design it and then we deliver it, for example. It'd be nice to have it a little bit more collaborative, because the point where it becomes tricky for us is if you have a basic rain garden, that is just going to overflow onto a green space, then you're fine. So it's about developing a system with resilience. So if you don't have the leeway to then have it overflow onto a green space, making sure that that is going to have the capacity and maybe connects back in to the sewer system, that's where those sorts of things, that when it becomes a little bit more complicated, that's where we'd probably want some help from engineers and things like that. And it'd be really great to have sort of almost light touch approach with it, rather than having to give engineers complete ownership of it. It would be really great to have partnerships like that in the future, I would think.
Is there any more questions at the back? No? If I take the liberty of asking one myself, if I may, clearly quite a bit of this is about partnerships. A lot of it's about partnerships, maybe all about partnerships, but at the interface between your organisations and the other organisations that you're working with, and even more remote organisations like the water companies, can you, perhaps each of you, identify what you would say is the biggest challenge, and perhaps what you found as the most productive tactics for getting sound relationships?
Yeah, I think certainly the biggest challenge in us getting to work in partnership with the people that we really need and want to work in partnership with, in our case, that certainly includes the local water company. I think the thing that we struggle to do is to just gain their attention, really, and get them to put down what it is they're doing and actually come and have a look at what we're doing and try and understand the benefits of working together on things. But there's been certain things that have happened in the last year or so which have helped open that door, and we've had some really useful meetings which have started to move that relationship on. And it's coming to things like this that really give us an opportunity to push that door open a little bit further. So thanks for the opportunity to come today. And with any luck, that we should be able to find a way of working with the local water company, which by demonstrating that what we're doing helps them meet their objectives, we should have a stronger case to work more closely with them.
Regarding partnerships, I think the reality is that most organisations, whether it's the local authorities, the EA, organisations such as ours, we actually all want the same thing. So we want good solutions, we want to improve habitat, we want to improve people's lives, and engage people. So we have certain skills, and the other organisations have certain skills. So the main thing to understand is they're actually all working to a common point, and we all want the same thing. So partnership working should be on that basis. Things that would help, I think, clarity on regulation. I'm a sort of a bit of a regulation type person. I don't think you get any serious change without legislation. I've seen that since I did my environment thing many years ago. All the big changes have happened because of hard legislation. Hopefully we won't see that drop off. Now we are going in our own direction. But for people involved in policy and regulation, I think you have a very big part to play.
In terms of partnerships, our partnership has worked quite well with the council in the ways that I mentioned, in that we brought the different skills. They helped a lot with getting the project off the ground, so they did lots of, they paid for lots of modelling to be done, identified the target areas. So a lot of the stuff that Andy has actually talked about in terms of finding out where they should go, all of that groundwork had actually been done before we came to the project, so that was brilliant. And also just getting, funding and things in place was really great. One of the difficulties we had is there was a high turnover of staff within the council, and so the project manager is technically falls within the council, but it's changed many of times, and we've been quite consistent throughout, and that's just having to work with, I also find that the council, the people on the council, it doesn't always fall within the flood risk or the flood team. And it might be, so the project officer is now within the sustainability team, and they don't necessarily have SuDS training. And I think it's really useful, whoever is going to manage the project should have SuDS training or a really good understanding of SuDS, because that's been a barrier sometimes of every time a new project manager comes on board, I almost have to, get them up to speed with what we're trying to achieve. And so they don't hit the ground running, and that can be a little bit frustrating.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm willing to take one more quick question if there's anyone has suddenly thought they would like to ask one. Okay, I'll try and sum up what we've had this afternoon, which I think has been excellent for presentations. John, absent now, but he basically talked us through what was happening in Thames 21 River Trust area, particularly in respect to water quality benefits. So from the technical point of view, that was very interesting in itself. Charlene presented, well, apart from appeal for more rubbish in the area of southeastern River Trust area, so that the volunteers have got more work to do. I think that was what you were saying, Charlene. Yeah. That's what I'm going to take away from today. Apart from that, there was an excellent presentation about engagement with schools. Inspirational, I think, a lot of that. So that was excellent. And moving on to Andy's presentation, I really like the evidence-based approach. I am a bit of a fanatic for good quality evidence, and makes for good sound decisions. And I thought that was an excellent way into the subsequent examples that were given. And then Pete's work, which I was enthused by as well, was particularly hands-on, I felt, and other people in the audience commented on the fact that the way the volunteers were actually delivering work and delivering it well. And I think the way Pete answered that as well was interesting, that these people are doing it because they like doing what they're doing, and they will deliver work to good quality for that, which shows the strength of the third sector. But I think what the four presentations have shown is that strength is also diversity, its flexibility, its agileness of the third sector, and its ability to work with partners, with a driver of some idealism still, which is really good. And I think that's a strength of the sector, and I think the links to the communities that have come out today, I would suggest, are probably only a start of this, and would actually provide us with a good foundation for some more presentations on this particular theme. I'd like now, in closing, well, first of all, to wish you all a safe journey home, but then I'd like us to thank the speakers in the usual way, please.